Hello everyone, so this is my second part of my Percy Jackson reread, so if you want to see the first part, I will leave a link in the description and you can check that out, but right now let's just get into it because I have so much to talk about. I am currently about 50 pages into the Titan's Curse and I am just absolutely loving it so far. I've been kind of waiting to get to this book because for those of you that don't know, Nico is like my all-time favorite character in the Percy Jackson series, and he is of course introduced in this book. He is just so sweet and happy and innocent in this book, and it's so weird because like that's not who he is in the later books. I'm just savoring every moment of his childhood in this book. I just love reading about Nico in this book, but obviously this is not going to be a Nico gush fest because if it was, I would do a whole another video on that. Also, I want to say one thing about Bianca. Over the 4 years since I first read this book, Bianca has become like a villain in my head, and I have kind of twisted her into like this really awful person who just abandoned her brother and then got herself killed halfway through her first quest. Upon reread, I will say I am viewing her a lot differently. I'm starting to realize just how manipulated she has been from the Hunters. She literally knew that she was a half-blood for like 10 minutes before the Hunters were like, come be with us forever and abandon your brother, you know, you'll be free of all responsibility from him. And looking back on it, like, I can totally understand why she wanted to be free from Nico, because let's be honest, Nico's a little bit annoying in this book. When I first read the Titan's Curse, I actually originally viewed Nico as just flat out annoying. Like, he didn't actually become my favorite character until much later, and I can totally understand why Bianca wanted to get a break from him. I do think that it was partly her decision to join the Hunters, but I cannot deny the fact that she was so manipulated by them. I went into this book already disliking the Hunters. As I'm reading this book, that dislike is turning into like a full-on hatred for the Hunters. They are all between the ages of 10, Nico's age, 10 to 14. And these are children that Artemis is manipulating to leave their families and join them and get sucked into all these life-threatening situations. And she bribes them with immortality. One other thing I want to talk about before I continue on with this book is when I first read the Titan's Curse, I really missed Annabeth's presence. Like, I really was upset that she was barely in it. The Titan's Curse was one of my least favorite books because of that, because we barely got any Perciveth development because Annabeth wasn't in it, and I also just really like Annabeth as a character, and I just missed her the entire time when I was reading the book. I really love the dynamic that Percy and Thalia have, and that's honestly keeping me kind of entertained enough to the point that I'm not missing Annabeth too much yet. I actually kind of want to see Percy be on a mission by himself without Annabeth, and I honestly don't remember how that mission goes. I will say I'm reading this one a lot slower, but I am really enjoying it and I'm really excited to continue. And yeah, I will see you when I am a bit further through this book. Alright, I have so much to update everyone on, so I am on page roughly 170 right now in this book. So I'm a little bit over halfway through, and I have to say that this is probably my favorite one so far in the reread, which is shocking. Because when I first read the Titan's Curse, one with the Sea of Monsters were my two least favorite in the series. I have to say that I can kind of start to see the beginnings of Nico's crush on Percy in this book. When I first read this series, I didn't know that, obviously. I didn't know that he had a crush on Percy. So it's been really fun to go back and see all of the signs from like the beginning up until the House of Hades. The biggest one that I've noticed so far is on page 82, when he's playing Capture the Flag and he like runs up to Percy in his armor and he's like, oh look at my armor, like this is so cool, Percy. And then another scene is during the promise to keep my sister safe scene. I don't even know if I want to call it a crush yet, but it's just if you're looking at it in that lens, I feel like you can kind of see it a little bit. I have a feeling I'm going to see more of it in the later books. I really don't remember the end of this book very well. It's really fun and it honestly kind of makes me feel like I am reading this for the first time. I have to say that I am liking Bianca so much more upon this reread. I think she has a lot of depth. I'm actually on the chapter where she dies, so I'm getting a little bit sad about it because like she's an interesting character, and I think that if she was a hunter for longer, if she was even alive for longer, she would have fully come into her powers more. But she doesn't even know that she's a child of Hades. All that potential is just wasted. Also, another thing about that, I really like all the Easter eggs and all the hints leading to the eventual reveal that Nico and Bianca are not from the century. You know, when they last went through DC, there was no metro, and the fact that also Bianca can, like, destroy those skeletons is a sign that she's a child of Hades. So I really like all those hints and stuff leading up to it, and it's so obvious upon reread that they're children of Hades, but obviously when you're first reading this book, you kind of overlook all of that stuff. And lastly, I'm definitely starting to miss Annabeth a little bit. I know I said in my last update that I don't really miss Annabeth too much, but I'm definitely starting to notice her absence. That's all I wanted to say so far with this book. I am really loving it so far, and I will update you whenever I finish it. So I finished The Titan's Curse last night at around like 12:30 in the morning, and I am finally ready to share my final thoughts on this book. As I've been saying in this reread, there's a lot of things that I have forgotten in this series. Like, I remember the bare bones. I remember how each book kind of ends, but I don't remember a lot of the itty-gritty, a lot of the, like, meat of the book. Did Kronos, like, heal Luke whenever Luke fell, like, 50 feet towards the end of the book? Because I don't know how anyone could survive that fall, and everyone kept saying, oh no, he's still alive, and I know he is still alive. So, like, did Kronos, I don't think Kronos resurrected him, because I don't think Luke died, but did Kronos, like, heal him? And was that healing that he did, is that whenever he ultimately possessed Luke? Because over the course of the last, like, 2 books, Luke has been, like, slowly getting paler, and he's just been looking a lot more frail and old and weak. So is he slowly getting possessed by Kronos during this time, and was the final straw whenever he fell and Kronos had to heal him? And as I was saying in my last vlog, I talked a lot about how Tyson is potentially autistic, and he's supposed to represent autistic children. And I will say that upon reading this book, I am even more sure that his special interest is tinkering and fixing things and building new tools and stuff. I absolutely love that, because there's so much great representation in Percy Jackson books. The fact that we also have an autistic person in this series is just really great. And just a quick side note, at the very end of the book, they go up to Mount Olympus for the winter solstice meeting. Why wasn't Hades there? Because isn't Hades supposed to appear at the winter solstice meeting? But I'm almost positive that Percy did not mention him in that meeting, because I was looking for his name and he was not mentioned there. So I don't know if that was maybe a mistake on REREADING's part, but maybe he was sad because Bianca just died, and I'm sure he knew that, so maybe he was busy there. And then to add on to Hades and his children, I feel so bad for Nico. I am fully aware that I just read the very last bit of Nico ever being like a child. He is 10. And he just lost his sister, and what Percy said on page 310 really hit me. This is when he was talking about how he would take on the prophecy, and he said, I can't let Nico be in any more danger. I said, I owe that much to his sister. I let them both down. I'm not going to let that poor kid suffer anymore. And I'm just thinking, Percy, he's going to suffer so much more in this series. I'm excited for his story, but I just, that you promise scene just gets me every single time. And that's really all I want to say on The Titan's Curse. I think overall, I definitely enjoyed this one a lot more than I did when I first read it. I did still miss Annabeth upon reading this book, but I definitely did not miss her as much as when I first read it, because I really got to know the other characters, and I really got to embrace, like, seeing Thalia and Zoe and all of those characters a lot more than I did the first time. I know I was saying that earlier it was my favorite, but I think my favorite one as a whole so far in this series is still The Lightning Thief, but this one is definitely up there. I'll do a whole, like, ranking at the end of this video on, like, all 5 books. But yeah, that's about it. I'm really excited to start the Battle of Labyrinth. I will see you whenever I get further into this book. So I am about halfway through the Battle of Labyrinth now, and I have to say that I'm really enjoying this one. This was one of my favorite ones whenever I first read the series. So a couple of things that I want to talk about in this book. Jealous Annabeth. I love Jealous Annabeth. I was one of the people that actually liked Rachel when I first read her. Thought she was a really great character. She's not trying to get in the way of Percy and Annabeth, right? I really like Annabeth's jealousy in this book. It's really shining a light on Percabeth developing. And to add on to Jealous Annabeth, and Percabeth developing, I remember I used to always love Malcolm, because he seemed to be the first person, Annabeth's half-brother, the first person that actually started to notice Percy and Annabeth's feelings for each other. So that scene where he walks in on Percy and Annabeth hugging is just adorable. Okay, quick Nico gush fest for a minute. I told myself I would not gush about Nico for this entire video, because this is a Percy Jackson reread vlog, not a how much does Lucy love Nico vlog. But the line on page 140 broke my heart in so many pieces. This is after Nico reunites with Percy, Grover, Annabeth, and Tyson. Nico looked thinner and paler than he had in the Iris messages. I wondered if he'd eaten in the last week. His black clothes were dusty from traveling in the labyrinth, and his eyes were full of hate. He was too young to look so angry. I still remembered him as the cheerful little kid who played with mythomagic cards. You know how I said in the last update that I was like savoring young Nico? Yeah, young Nico is over. Oh my golly, and like, the fact is, by this point in the series, he lost his sister and he's been manipulated by a ghost. But there is so much other stuff that is going to happen to Nico in the later series and the later books. I want to hug him. I want to hug him so much, and like, it just breaks my heart every single time. So another thing is, I kind of like what Gyron, three-bodied monster guy, is doing to those cows. Well, I don't like what he's doing to them, but it reminds me, him sacrificing the cows for meat reminds me a lot of Odysseus' crew in the Odyssey, and even though no one in the book ever made that connection, I do think that that's where Gyron got that idea from, so I thought that was pretty cool. It was something I definitely did not realize when I first read the series. I also really thought it was interesting that Daedalus has a nephew, Perdix. I had no idea that Daedalus had a nephew. We learned about Daedalus in my class, but we never learned about Perdix, am I pronouncing that name right? The nephew that was like really, really smart. We never learned about him. And so it was really interesting to read his story in this book, and I had no idea that Daedalus killed his nephew. That really took me by surprise, but it also makes sense because it's Greek and Roman mythology. So that's all I really have to say as I reach the halfway point in this book. I will update you again whenever I finish it, and yeah, I'll see you then. So I finally finished the Battle of Labyrinth, and I definitely have some final thoughts before I jump into the Last Olympian. My first thought is I actually like Calypso a lot more. When I first read the Battle of Labyrinth, and then when I first read like all the other books in the series that Calypso was in, I for some reason couldn't stand her. I had just read the Odyssey when I read Percy Jackson the first time, and I really did not like Calypso too much in that book. But upon rereading it in this book, I just feel so bad for her. I also had a feeling that Quintus was Daedalus, but I did not realize that he made a body for himself and that this is like his fifth body. I don't even know how that's possible. Like, Quintus/Daedalus was explaining it to Nico, and even he looked surprised, so clearly that's not a common thing. I guess just when you're that good of an inventor, you can make a body for yourself and essentially prolong your life for thousands of years. I genuinely did not remember that. Also, I said that I would be looking for all of the signs in this series of Nico's crush on Percy, because obviously when I first read the series, I did not know that, and I will say that there are definitely a couple of signs. A big example that I saw was on page 285. I'm sorry, Percy. My nose told me you were in danger. He convinced me to go back into the maze. You were trying to help us? And then there's another sign on page 295 to 296. Thanks for coming after us, I told him at last. Nico's eyes narrowed. He didn't seem as angry as he used to, just suspicious, careful. I owed you for the ranch, Percy. Plus, I wanted to see Daedalus for myself. It hasn't been easy, you know, having only the dead for company, knowing that I'll never be accepted by the living. Only the dead respect me, and they only do it out of fear. You could be accepted, I said. You could have friends at camp. He stared at me. Do you really believe that, Percy? Kronos finally possessed Luke. Yeah, I didn't realize it happened at the end of this book. And it's not that I like when he possesses him, it's just one of the pivotal things that I remember in the series. So going back to Nico, because I'm trying not to make this Nico Gush Fest, but it honestly kind of is turning into that. So, I know that there is a war going on. There's the Titan War going on. But the minute that Chiron finds out that Nico is the son of Hades, he should immediately start working on building a cabin for him. This is something that throughout the 4 years since I first read this series has always bothered me. The fact that Nico literally is introduced in the Titan's Curse, the third book in the Percy Jackson series, and then doesn't officially get a cabin for himself until the end of the Blood of Olympus. And I understand that there was a war going on, but the minute that Chiron found out that there was a son of Hades, that there was a Hades kid around, they should have immediately started building a cabin, because Camp Half-Blood is all about accepting the demigods. It's all about making them feel safe, making them feel like they're part of a family. And Nico doesn't feel like that for multiple reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is because he's a son of Hades. I just wish that he had a cabin, and I honestly feel like it would have prevented him from running off so many times. And just felt a little bit more like he belonged at Camp Half-Blood, and a cabin would have made him feel like that. So those are all my thoughts on this book. I'm super excited to dive into The Last Olympian. I remember this being my absolute favorite book in the Percy Jackson series, so I'm very excited to dive into it and see if it is still my favorite. So it's been about a week and I have a lot to update you on. So I am on roughly page 215 of this book, and I am absolutely loving it so far. I wanted to film an update a couple of days ago, and then I just never got the chance to, but I have a lot to say, so let's just jump in. So the first thing I want to say is I never understood the importance of Ethan in this series until this reread. When I first read the Percy Jackson series, I just didn't really understand why Percy and friends were making such a big deal over Ethan. Like, he just seemed like a really minor character to me that I know just eventually died in the series, but it turns out he actually is really important. He's betrayed Percy multiple times and gave away their location multiple times, and was the one that almost stabbed Percy in the back when Annabeth intercepted it, but we'll get more to that later because I absolutely love that scene. The Percabeth moments in this book have increased like tenfold. I feel like every single scene that they are in this book together, there is a little sign of their eventual relationship at the end of this book. This book is just so good. It is the only book in the original 5-book series that does not have like a formal quest to it. Everything about this book is just battle after battle. There is no quest, there is no structure really, and I kind of like that because a lot of Percy Jackson books are just the same structure every single book. It's a quest. They go on the quest. They complete the quest. And it's just the same thing. This book is just a breath of fresh air because it's different. It's not something that we've seen from a lot of his other books. So I just really, really like that. And I think that's why I loved this book so much when I first read it. And I'm remembering all of that and just loving it just as much upon rereading it. I have not gushed about Nico yet in this book, so let's do that. I completely forgot that he is in like 50 pages in the beginning of this book. So I knew that he was the one that had Percy bathe in the river Styx, but I did not realize that there was like this whole journey leading up to Percy bathing in the river Styx, and Nico was a part of every single step in that journey. There's just so much Nico in the beginning of this book, and I love how he's trying to find out who his family is in this book too, because I actually don't remember a huge amount of Nico's backstory. As something that I'm really, really excited to dive more in with this book and in the future books, and I really hope that the Nico standalone maybe touches on more of Nico's backstory. Also, I did not realize that Luke gave Annabeth her signature knife. Really interesting little tidbit of information that I completely forgot. Okay, little moment here about Percy making his Achilles heel the small of his back. That is like the absolute dumbest place to put your Achilles heel. Percy was like justifying it with like, oh, well, no one's gonna aim for my back and I'm always wearing armor there. But I'm like, no, you don't put it right in like the middle of your back like that. That is the worst possible place to have your Achilles heel. I would put my Achilles heel spot like in between my toes or something because no one would ever go there. I'm pretty sure Luke sticks it in his armpit or something. Like, that's ideal, although it's funny because Percy even flat out says, why would I stick it in my armpit? I would not do that. I've had multiple rants about this in the past, and I don't understand why he does it. It makes absolutely no sense. I really like how Percy fights the Minotaur again in this series. It's very full circle, and the way that he defeats him this time is just so easy. Like, he doesn't even really get hurt at all, and yet the first time he passed out for like 3 days after defeating the Minotaurs. On page 188, when Percy is fighting the army on the Brooklyn Bridge, he drives them past the bridge, and then after he drives the monsters past the bridge, Annabeth tells Percy to come back, and he says, some part of me knew she was right, but I was doing so well, I wanted to destroy every last monster. And this reminded me a lot of Patroclus in the Iliad when he was wearing Achilles' armor and was driving the army away, and he had done that, but then kept going and ultimately got himself killed. Now, obviously, Percy's not getting himself killed here, but it reminded me a lot of Patroclus, and it really made me see the similarities between Percy and Patroclus, and this is something that I never noticed before, because when I first read the Percy Jackson series, I had never read the Iliad. I didn't even know that Patroclus existed. Like, I didn't know who he was. So it was really interesting to reread it, having read parts of the Iliad and having read the Song of Achilles. Also, I'm going to go back to the Annabeth being stabbed scene that I mentioned earlier in this update. I absolutely love the Percabeth moment in that scene. I know it's a really sad moment seeing Annabeth in pain like that and seeing Percy so upset that she's in pain, but I just love the scene. You're cute when you're worried. That line is adorable. I just love it so much. And also, that's the scene that we first meet Will Solace, Nico's eventual boyfriend. I love Will. I wish he was introduced earlier in the book, but I'm really happy that I got to meet him, and I'm excited to see him later on, but I know he's a kind of a minor character until the Blood of Olympus, but still. So yeah, that was my update on this book. I will update you whenever I finish it. So I finally finished The Last Olympian. I'm really excited to be diving into the Heroes of Olympus, but before I do, I have some final thoughts on this book. So when I first read the series for the first time, this book was my favorite, and I have to say that it still stands as my favorite. It was Absolutely incredible. Also, really quick side note before I jump into my final thoughts on this book, there have been 5 roles cast for the Percy Jackson series. They are all of like the major guest adult roles. They consist of Sally Jackson, Chiron, Mr. D, Smelly Gabe, and Mrs. Dodds. And I have to say that when I saw the casting for who would play Mr. D, I may have ran around screaming for like a minute. I am so excited for this series, like more excited than I was like a week ago. They just started filming today too, so it's really exciting, and I cannot wait to see how that goes, and I ultimately cannot wait to watch the show. So yeah, side note that had nothing to do with this book, but I couldn't not mention it at this point. It's just, I'm so excited. Okay, back to the video. So the first thing was I absolutely loved relearning Luke's backstory. This is something that I remember we learned in this book, but I did not realize how present it was. It really does take up a good portion of the book. I completely forgot that his mother tried being the Oracle of Delphi, and that's why she went all crazy. But I'll actually talk a little bit more about that later, because I have a lot to say on the Oracle of Delphi and how Rachel was able to be the new Oracle and all that stuff. So as I mentioned in my last update, there was a Patroclus Achilles parallel where Percy was wanting to drive the battle back, and same with Patroclus in the Iliad, which ultimately got him killed. And I actually found another Patroclus parallel in this book when Selena uses Clarice's armor to lead the Ares cabinet into battle, and that ultimately gets her killed. This is very similar to in the Iliad, where Patroclus uses Achilles' armor to have all of the troops think that he is Achilles, and he leads them into battle and ultimately gets him killed. And I really liked seeing all of those parallels. I thought it was really interesting. Another quick parallel is Clarice refusing to fight because her pride is ruined, and that is the same for Achilles and why he did not fight originally in the Iliad. One of my all-time favorite scenes in the Percy Jackson series is when Luke takes the knife and kills Kronos, and it's just such a great character building moment for Luke, and I just absolutely loved it. I really understood it so much better this time. I mean, I understood it when I first read it. Being reminded of all of the stuff leading up to it was just really great, because I genuinely forgot a lot of the build-up. I love how Luke, who was so against the gods and so against, all of that they stood for, that to the point that he literally gave Kronos his body, was able to draw the line at everyone gets destroyed. Annabeth gets destroyed. The entire world gets destroyed. And when it came to that, he made the right decision. Just Luke in general became one of my favorite characters in this reread. I really did not expect that, but he is such an interesting, complex character. Pretty evil, but a great character nonetheless. So going back to the Oracle of Delphi and how Rachel was able to become the Oracle. So I'll admit that I never really understood why Rachel wanted to become the Oracle so badly and how she was able to become the Oracle, but upon rereading it, it makes a lot of sense. So as we know, Luke's mother tried becoming the Oracle and then failed, and this is because Hades curses the original Oracle of Delphi back in the 1930s that she cannot pass the spirit of Delphi on to anyone until the Great Prophecy is resolved and his children don't feel like outcasts anymore. This is all explained on page 211 of this book. So, by the time that Rachel becomes the Oracle of Delphi at the very end, the prophecy was just completed, the battle was already won, and in that moment, Nico was accepted at camp. He was welcome. He was treated like a hero, and he was also the only Hades kid alive at that moment. So, Hades' children did not feel like outcasts anymore. So that's why Rachel was able to become the Oracle. Now, I'm sure you already know this, but I made this connection when I was reading it. I also wonder, had Rachel chosen to become the Oracle, like let's say 6-8 months later when Nico was once again isolating himself and feeling like an outcast again, would that have worked? And I actually think it would have still, because that was a lot of Nico's own personal problems. Like obviously it did also stem from the fact that he was a child of Hades, but at that point it was really just a lot of stuff in his head and a lot of him convincing himself that he was an outcast versus him actually being an outcast at Camp Half-Blood, because before he didn't even have a cabin. He has a cabin now. He does have a place at camp. He just doesn't believe that he has a place at camp in the later books. So I do think that if Rachel had taken the Oracle of Delphi like a year later, it would have still worked. I just thought all of that was really interesting, and it really made a lot of sense to me, and I think Rachel's a great pick for the Oracle. I always liked Rachel, and I'm really happy that she was able to safely get the Oracle of Delphi and not die in the process. And lastly, I just absolutely love how this book sets up the Heroes of Olympus series. That is another one of my favorite series out of all of the Rick Riordan books. So that is really all I have to say on this series and this reread. Thank you so much for following this journey with me throughout all 5 books. I have not decided yet if I'm going to vlog the Heroes of Olympus, but please let me know if you would want to see that, because I would definitely do that if you're interested, and I might do it anyway because I think that having all of the first 10 books vlogged would be pretty cool. So let me know. I have a ton of thoughts on that series, and I have a lot of theories also that have been slowly building in my head over the last 4 years since I first read it. So yeah, thanks so much again for following me along, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good day, everyone. Bye!